Hey everybody, welcome back to the Senators Roundtable. I'm your host Jacob Billington, joined by Dayton Reimer as usual, and for what's probably the third or fourth time now, we have Alex Adams on, newest member of the Sportsnet team, covering the Ottawa Senators, and I've been seeing a lot of people online really appreciating your content. Congratulations on the position. You just made an appearance on 32 Thoughts, and
Yep.
so yeah, it's been a pretty busy couple months for you. How you doing?
It's been a whirlwind, but it's been really awesome. I've really enjoyed my time at Sportsnet. It's been cool. When you get a text from Elliot Friedman congratulating you and just even being around the rink again, I definitely had the urge to for the season to start, and obviously it does in a couple days. But overall, it's just been a whirlwind, been a lot of fun, and I'm really excited for the Senator season just to cover it. And I think it's going to be, a quite a fascinating season on the ice, and hopefully it seems like much less drama off the ice, which I think is good for the product on the ice as well. So overall, thanks so much for having me on, guys, and I'm excited to talk some sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you still doing your Behind the Play podcast?
I am.
Good.
It is taking a back burner because writing is a lot of work, but I do have some cool stuff coming up, and as you guys know, podcasting is tough too. So, but I still have some cool stuff coming up in the ether.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing that and all the content. And you're one of the go-to guys now for the lines right away and all the quotes from Travis Green. You've been doing a great job keeping up with that. So
Thank you.
if you haven't already, make sure you follow Alex on Twitter. But we'll move into some Senators talk. So the 23-man roster has been set. Um, Right now, it's Noah Gregor, Adam Gaudette, and Zach MacEwen. They kind of got those three available spots. You could say four with Nick Cousins in there as well, but that was always going to be his spot. So those three made the roster over Jenik and Zach Ostapchuk. Dayton, I'll start with you on where you think kind of. Do you think that this is the right move? Is there one guy you would switch in and out? What are your thoughts?
I think, yeah, for the most part, it's the right move. Jan Unique had a fantastic preseason, but apparently, I was checking on some Reddit threads. That's pretty standard for him. He generally has a really good showing in preseason, and then doesn't usually carry that over into the regular season, which is unfortunate. But I'm sure he'll get some luck, some call ups and some looks this throughout the year. Noah Gregor, I don't. He wasn't my favorite, but I get why he's there. He was, one of the earlier signings, and he brings a lot of speed to the lineup. And I believe you mentioned last week that he can slide into a position beside someone like Tim Stützle or Brady Tkachuk and keep up with them. He's not on the same level, but he has the same speed. Zach MacEwen, after that game with Montreal, I am super not surprised. You want somebody who has sandpaper, if you if you will. Um, I was a little surprised that Ostapchuk maybe got it over Gaudette, but Gaudette also had a really good preseason. So for the most part, I'm comfortable with that. I think Ostapchuk will be Gaudette's heir. He might just not be quite at the level that they want him, would be my guess.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is that Ostapchuk could go through waivers, or didn't need waivers, could just go straight to Belleville. I think that that was kind of the decision maker there. I mean, Gaudette cleared waivers, so I guess maybe that's a bit of a moot point. But Alex, what are your thoughts on the final forward position race?
Yeah, I think Dane touched upon it. Yannick had a really good first game of preseason. I wouldn't have said he was super outstanding otherwise. And I think for fans, maybe they see the 4-point night in Toronto and get really excited. But I think overall, I didn't feel as though he really provided much. He's good on the faceoffs. His underlying metrics were okay, but he was physical, nasty. But as you guys alluded to, Adam Gaudette had a really good training camp, and Travis Green knows him. Although I asked him about that. Did that come into play in his decision? He said no. But at the end of the day, Gaudette throughout camp was talking about, I want to produce, but I want to be a really good fourth liner, defensively responsible. And I think for the most part, he did that. And with Ostapchuk, I don't think he played particularly well in preseason. He had one nice goal, but outside of that, his underlying numbers were terrible. I don't think he was super noticeable, and he's probably on this team if someone picks up Adam Gaudette. That was probably the calculus for the Senators, is that if Gaudette got picked up, then Ostapchuk is your fourth line center. He did not, and but Travis Green seemed to really like him, likes his size. He asked him about him a couple of days ago, and he said, he sees him as a prototypical center in this league, just with his size and skill. So I don't think Ostapchuk will be waiting too long to be called back up. But I think at the end of the day, it makes sense. MacEwen is really the 13th forward. So I think in a pinch, you bring him up. He still has a fair bit of money on his contract. He played decently well for who he is in preseason, but I think his role is kind of cemented in stone in terms of just being this team's 13th forward.
Yeah, and I did like what I saw from MacEwen at points. Like in the game against Pittsburgh, he was going into the corners hard. He was making great plays just in the puck battles in the offensive zone, and it's not stuff that you'll expect to see from him every game. But the fact that he's putting in that work ethic, and he's putting in that effort to win those battles, make his mark, and really show that he wants to make this team. Obviously, you don't expect that he was happy to play half the year in Belleville last year, and so he comes up now. I mean, he's got his guaranteed contract, so I'm sure he's not too upset. But yeah, if he made a good mark in the preseason for the kind of player that he is. And like you said with Jenik, he wasn't fantastic throughout the preseason. I did really like him, and I thought that he would get the fourth line spot, especially with the grittiness and the toughness that he showed. But yeah, it was hard to go wrong with any of those players. It was always just kind of which ones are going to work the best together. So yeah, we'll move to the defense now. So the top four was always going to be a lock. Shabbat, Sanderson, Zubin, Jensen. There was no questions about that. And then Tyler Clevin, that was his spot to lose. Wasn't any competition for that. It was a little bit surprising to see Donovan Sabrango hang around as long as he did, which was great to see. But it was the right side third pair where there was question marks. First thing I'm going to ask you, Alex, is do you think that it was the right move to send Carter Yakemchuk back to the Calgary Hitmen?
I would have given him 9 games. That's personally what I would have done, and seen where he was at after. Maybe it's only 3 games and he looks like he looks way out of over his head, and then you send him down. But I thought throughout preseason he had been clearly one of Ottawa's best 6 defensemen, and much better than either Travis Hamonic or JBD. At the same time, I totally understand the rationale from the Senators, where they want to let him, kind of tune up his game in the Western Hockey League. And I think it's really unfortunate that he isn't able to go to the AHL, because I think that would be the best place for him to play against men, play at a way higher level than the Western Hockey League. And maybe if he dominates there, then you can bring him up. And if there's injuries, we'll see. But unfortunately, I think the best place for his development would have been the AHL, and that was just not an option. And maybe I think the calculus for Steve Staios is just, why don't we send him down? Don't kind of give him that itch and think he's right there. Just let him know where he's at, have a full year in Calgary, play the World Juniors here in Ottawa, which will be interesting to see him with all the fanfare here as well. So it makes sense, but personally, I think just the way he played, and this team is in a win now mode, and I think that adding them to the group and seeing where he's at, if he can kind of contribute, would have been a really interesting thing, and I don't think would have necessarily hampered his development. At the same time, I am not Steve Staios, but and I don't get paid millions of dollars to make decisions. But I get the rationale, but I would have kept him up, but I don't think him playing the entire season was very likely.
Yeah. Dayton, you've been pretty adamant on your stance on this, that you think it's the right move. So I'll rephrase the question. What are the things that you really liked from Carter Yakemchuk in the preseason this year? And what do you think he's going to be able to work on the most in the WHL?
Well, I love the offense that he brought. He brought this, level of confidence that I don't think you've seen in a prospect coming into Ottawa for probably a few years at least. He looked like he wanted to play NHL games, and in the preseason, he was able to do things that other guys maybe would have been afraid to try. He had rush attempts. I think he led the team in rush attempts, if I'm not mistaken. he was creating offense everywhere that he tried, and he was looking really good. There were, of course, things that he needed to work on, though, and I think they did become evident the more he played. Um, he has a lacking defensive game, and his skating also isn't quite up to par. I think I disagree with Alex in that I don't see the AHL as somewhere where he would have thrived. I think he would have been given, you know, mediocre to minimum minutes. Whereas in the WHL, he's top pairing immediately. He's going to be playing 20 to 25 minutes a night. And he's going to dominate because he has that size, he has that skill. And now he has a chance to, play in a lot of situations that maybe he wouldn't have had last season. He's going to be able to develop that game without that heavy pressure. The Calgary Hitmen are going to be pushing for the playoffs. They've made a couple of moves to try to shore up that. But with Yakemchuk, they're going to have a much easier time. He brings a high level of offense. And now he has a chance to work with some players and work with some coaches to get that skating down a little bit easier and to get that defensive game by trying out those defensive situations. He's going to maybe a little bit trial by fire, but in the WHL, you have the opportunity to, do that without ruining a development.
Yeah, and there's one point just with the AHL. I do think that he would do really well in the AHL, but one thing, it was either Mark Mathot or Cam Jansen said the AHL is a very difficult place for defensemen to learn the game because there's so much less like strategy and proper flow to the game. Where in the WHL, you get all these guys learning how to play that. In the NHL, that's what you're playing. But in the AHL, it's kind of gung ho and everybody's going just doing their own thing. And obviously, there's some structure to it. Every coach has their way of doing things. But it was a really interesting point. It was the point made about Tyler Clevin. So I think it was Mark Mathot there. And it was just saying, like, the way Tyler Clevin plays, he would have developed better in the NHL than he did in the AHL, which is a fair point, just because there's less structure in the AHL.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would kind of point to is he had 30 goals in 66 games last year in like he dominated that league. How is he going to become a better defenseman, in my opinion, playing against guys that he's already dominated against? At the same time, I think the World Juniors will be a really good part of his development and just to see how he matches up against the best players at his age level. But I think he's done enough at the junior level that I'm not sure where he's going to learn from. Obviously, wherever he was going to go, he would want to work on his skating, would want to work on his defensive side of his game, which I think, talking to Travis Green throughout camp, he seemed to be pretty pleasantly surprised, liked his gap control, liked his size and physicality. And I think for the most part, he didn't look too out of step on the defensive side. A couple times, he made the wrong reads and he isn't the most fleet of foot. But overall, I think he on that side of game wasn't as glaringly a weakness as we maybe thought heading into training camp and preseason. So I don't think they're making a disastrous move, but I do think the AHL would have been better. But maybe you're right. Like I'm not Mark Mathot, didn't play at that level, but I just think that when you go back to the WHL, what's he really gonna accomplish? He's too good for that league. The structure is probably not as good as the AHL. The league's just not as good. And if you've already dominated your peers, how is he going to improve if he's not playing against higher level competition, which the AHL provides? So that's really my rationale for that.
Yeah, no, and those are great points too. And the one thing I find funny is that, I mean, you're right. Like he has lots to work on in the at the NHL level, like with his defensive side. And everybody always points to that, including myself. But like you look at Jake Sanderson, he also made some bad reads. Thomas Chabot made some bad reads. I'm sure Cale Makar made some bad reads. It's just everybody focuses right on the prospects, which is fair because it's their first time playing at the NHL level. But yeah, that's one thing that I personally feel like I do way too much is just overanalyze the prospects in preseason, and forget about what the actual NHL stars are doing. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. He impressed everybody, and there's no doubt about it. And he earned the right to play NHL games this year. It was just the decision, what's best for his development.
What I think is maybe a fascinating storyline is maybe if the Senators finally get into a playoff spot, and they might not. I don't think that's assured at all, and all Sens fans feel that way, I'm sure. But um, Cale Makar, Charlie McAvoy. I'm not saying he's of that ilk, but those guys spent a year playing in college and then came up to the NHL just for the playoffs. And I wonder if the Senators are in that position. And you talk to Travis Green, they feel like he's pretty close. Probably just needs to get a bit stronger, a bit faster. What does 8 months do, right, for a player of that quality? So I wonder if maybe at the end of the season he plays 2, 3 games, doesn't burn that ELC, and if the Senators are, let's say, third in the division or whatever, and then he comes in, and if he's that kind of instant ad or trade deadline type ad, he could be pretty. Him and Sanderson played really well together. That would kind of slot Jensen to. Anyways, I'm foreshadowing too much, but I think that might be an interesting storyline moving forward.
So what you're saying is that after the WHL season, Carter Yakemchuk is going to lead the Senators to the playoffs, the Stanley Cup, and win the Conn Smythe.
Exactly. Yes. Jordan. Yeah. Jordan Bennington's tale from the ECHL, except this time with Yakimchuk in the dub. So that's exactly it. Yes.
Perfect. I'll hold you to it.
I definitely could see him coming into the end of the year. I don't know if I saw him dominate the WHL last year. Like 30 goals is 100%
Really?
impressive.
Yeah.
But he was making some really bad reads. There was a lot to learn in his decision making. And he cost the Hitmen goals. I don't know how many, but there were chances that he went really aggressive on the puck, made a move, didn't work out, and the other team picked it up and got some great. And I saw him do that 4 or 5 times in a game.
Well, you'll have to give us the boots on the ground reports this year with you covering the Blades.
I will. Yeah, they're coming at least a couple of times. So
Yeah.
yeah, and I saw him once in Calgary last year and was both awed and unbelievably frustrated when I watched him. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, he's going to pull off a spinorama. That's crazy. Oh, he pinched really bad that next shift. And now they're going to, oh no. He was the tale of two prospects in one
Yeah.
person.
And you get that a lot with the offensive defense, but it just takes
Yeah,
some seasoning wherever they're going to end up playing.
exactly. And I think the WHL is the best.
Fair enough. So what about the goaltending? So obviously Linus Ullmark looks fantastic. I bet you Steve Stais is just has the biggest smile on his face as we record this, as Jonas Korpisalo lets in 4 goals in the first period of the season. And Ottawa's now got Linus Ullmark unextended at this point. Alex, do you have any updates on that? Like, do you know, like have they started talking? Do you know?
I mean, Steos talked to my colleague, or at the Athletic, Julie McKenzie, and they said they had kind of had preliminary talks. It seems as though, just from what Allmark said and Steos as well, is that they're both kind of seeing where the season goes. But in my opinion, and again, I wouldn't say I have like inside info, maybe just reading the tea leaves, is that if Allmark and the Senators are playing well, he's playing great. He's up, obviously, a UFA at the end of the year, could make a lot of money. And if he feels like this is a good fit for him and the Senators are like, hey, we have the goalie that's going to lead us to the playoffs, I think it's a match made in heaven. And maybe we see him signing, maybe not the same term as Jeremy Swayman, but maybe close to that ballpark. I don't know. I do think if, let's say, the Senators struggle again, Allmark struggles, then both sides go their separate ways. So I think it's determined by how well the Senators play this season. But if you told me that Linus Ullmark signs an extension in December and the Senators are 20-10-4, yeah, that'd make a lot of sense to me. So
If you told me the Senators were 20-10-4, that wouldn't make much sense to me.
it wouldn't exactly. But I guess my point is really that is if they succeed, I think he'll sign an extension. If the team doesn't succeed, then I don't think he will, and then they'll have to figure out someone else in net. But moving forward, looking to the season, Allmark looked really good in preseason, just in practice compared to last year. Noticeable difference on one side of the net with Allmark and net and just the poise. And I think he's talked about it, just the leadership that he provides, and that he believes that as a goalie he can be a leader. And I think the quote that went kind of did the rounds on social media. I think on Saturday was, we haven't accomplished anything. And he's really been at the forefront of that mindset of, hey, it's preseason, or it's, we're 1-0. Who effing cares? It's one game, on to the next. And I think that's what this team really needs. And I think he'll provide it, in the net and in the dressing room as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So throughout the preseason, Dayton, we saw Anton Forsberg struggle a good bit. We saw Mad Sogard. We saw, like you mentioned with Yakemchuk, two tails of a prospect. Some good showings, some bad showings, whether it's period to period, game to game, whatever. Where do you sit with Forsberg as the backup? Are you comfortable with that?
I think I'm still comfortable with that. His preseason stats have kind of been all over the place since he came to Ottawa, and he's then put up some pretty decent seasons in the past, ignoring last season. Um, he's not necessarily the greatest preseason performer. Um, he is a guy I think who thrives in, you know, small chunks, especially when the pressure's on, right? There's no pressure in preseason. It's whatever. But in 21-22, he had a 917 save percentage, 46 games, right? That preseason, he had an 892 save percentage. So I think he's tough to read in the preseason. I think he's more of a clutch performer, and that's what makes him a really good backup. And I think behind Allmark, that will hopefully work better than it did last season.
Fair enough. Alex, you sitting on the same fence? You fine with Forsberg being the backup there?
I mean, they don't really have another choice. I would say that with Forsberg, he had the double knee surgery last year, came into camp, and then the team was such a mess in front of him, and they were spiraling, and so yeah, he hasn't had the greatest preseason, and I wouldn't say he's looked amazing in camp. But if Allmark's in that 55, 60-ish games played, and you have Forsberg playing 22, 25, something in that range, I think you're fine with it. I don't think he's a glaring weakness where it's like, oh my God, we're gonna play our backup and let's just try not to hold down the fort. I think with Forsberg, he's a capable NHL goaltender. I think he's closer to his 21-22 season and 22-23 season than he is to last year coming off the injury. So overall, I wouldn't say I'm like, this is a great tandem. It's gonna be awesome, but they do have the goalie that they need in with Allmark, and I think Forsberg will do the job as a backup in this league and for this team.
Perfect. So that leads me to you said you didn't think they were the perfect tandem. Where's the biggest strength on the Senators roster?
If in my opinion, it's their forward depth. I think looking at years prior, they really didn't get a lot of secondary scoring from their third and fourth lines, and I think now with Amadio, Perron, Pinto slotting into the 3C, especially now with Norris healthy, and obviously last year with Pinto and Norris in different ways being out of the lineup, having that up the middle of Stützle, Pinto, and Norris is pretty dynamite for this team. Greg goes to the wing, which he doesn't really like, but I think he's going to be a really good agitator, as we've seen already in preseason. I think Gregor is a really good fourth line player. Gaudette is a talented player at the fourth in the fourth line. Cousins brings like it just they have guys who've won. I really like Amadio on the third line. It just feels like a much more complete forward group than years prior, where maybe the top six was great, but then there wasn't much else left. And that now I think this team has really rounded itself into a pretty legitimate forward group in the NHL that I think is in the maybe 10, top 15 in the league. So I think that's the biggest area of their biggest strength for this team outside of Allmark as well.
Yeah, over the offseason, I was a bit skeptical of the move by Steve Staios to sign Amadio for 2.6 and then use a third round pick to trade Joseph. I wasn't sure that the difference between Joseph and Amadio was 350K and a third round pick. I wasn't convinced. But I've been proven wrong. I've really liked Amadio this preseason. And he looks really good. And I think he's going to bring some great things to Ottawa. And like you mentioned, he won the Stanley Cup. He was a great piece to that. I mean, technically, Matthew Joseph won the Stanley Cup as well. He wasn't a key piece or anything, but yeah. So it's really interesting to see how wrong I was about that, and I'll wear that. Um, but yeah, Dayton, what do you think the biggest strength is for the Senators?
I think I'd have to agree. Though maybe a bit more emphasis on their top six. I think their top six is really good. I don't know if they've had a chance to really be a top six since they all got drafted. There's always been someone out with injury. There's been questions on the wings. Now they have a really solid, really cohesive unit. I think we're going to see a bit more of that resurgence that we saw before 23-24 with like Tim Stützle and Brady Tkachuk. And I think we're going to see a little bit more from Claude Giroux and hopefully Josh Norris finds his rhythm again. As long as his injury concerns are behind him. That's of course a big question mark heading in, but if everyone stays healthy, that's a really good first two lines.
How has Norris looked on the ice to you, Alex?
He's looked really good to me. The one thing I would say is like I think Graham Nichols tweeted this yesterday, but him taking one-timers, he hasn't been doing that a ton until recently. But I think he's looked really good. He's leaned up a little bit. He's a bit more he's a bit faster, but he's clearly I think prioritized kind of getting faster and a bit lighter than he used to be, where he was a bit heavier. Not that he's was like out of shape or anything like that, but just maybe not prioritizing just being a Hulk like maybe Brady Tkachuk or Jake Sanders. But he's looked really good, really fast. I thought he played in that Montreal game really well. Well, both, but primarily the first game, I thought he really grew into that game. The second one was a bit of a weirder one, but I think he's played really well. And yeah, just knock on wood that he doesn't hurt his shoulder again. But overall, I think he's looked really good. But if he's I think you kind of alluded to it with the shot. If he can be if that shot comes back and he's at least, as dominant as he was in the 21-22 season or even something somewhere close to that, that's a game changer for this team. I was just gonna say with Norris, um, I think it's all about the shot. If that comes back even close to where he was before, that's a legitimate 30-35 goal scorer. If it's not as it used to be, then it's a 20-25 goal scorer in Norris, but that's still pretty good from your second line center. He's not as much a playmaker, but overall, he's looked really good and fast out there.
Yeah, I think obviously getting back to 35 goals would be great. But with him, it's not just the goal scoring. I think people forget how good of a two-way option he was. I talked about that a few weeks ago on this podcast. And yeah, he was a great two-way option. He was one of their best defensive forwards. So that's another thing. If he's fully up to speed, then great. But moving on, what we're going to wrap up with is what is the weakest part of the roster? Alex, yeah.
Uh, yeah, I didn't know if it was Dane. I
Yeah,
didn't want
sorry.
to steal from him, but I was just gonna say I think it's the bottom pair of their defense. I really worry about if Shabbat or Sanderson is out for an extended period of time. They really don't have anyone in Belleville to come up as a left shot defenseman. And you rarely, if ever, see two right shot defensemen as a pairing. Maybe we see a JBD Hamonic pairing, but I do not really like that at all. So that's my really biggest area of concern. Like if you told me like if hey Alex, if kind of the worst case scenario happens, what would that look like? And I would say is Sanderson or Shabbat's out, and then they're just playing Tyler Clevin, who I thought had a really, really not a strong preseason and training camp, into inserting them into top 4 minutes. I think that would be um, real worry, and I don't think they would be able to make up for it and make the playoffs if that were to happen. So for me, that's the area of weakness is really just that the bottom pair of defense.
Yeah, I think Clevin really struggled as well, and I don't have the most confidence in Hamonic or Jacob Bernard Docker. I think Bernard Docker is definitely the better option of the two. But even in preseason, I would honestly say that Hamonic played better throughout the training camp. But throughout the course of the season, there's no doubt that Bernard Docker will catch up to him and pass him. I think it's just a good start by a veteran and a slow start by a young guy. But Bernard Docker's without a doubt the better defenseman, in my opinion, at least. Dayton, do you have the same answer there? I think that's a pretty fair take.
I do, yeah. I would probably lump the whole defense as maybe the weakest part. They do have some really good guys. I'm not trying to, take away from Jake Sanderson or Thomas Chabot or even Artem Zub. But you look at that compared to, I think, some of their biggest rivals, and they just don't have, like Alex said, the depth. That bottom pairing is, it's a necessity for the Senators. They've put guys there that can go there, but maybe shouldn't, if that's a fair assumption. I think, again, like Alex said, one person goes down, that's a mess. We haven't seen how, Nick Jensen's going to work with everybody. I mean, we saw a little bit in preseason, but I want to see some actual NHL games before I make too many judgments about the cohesion. And it has been an issue for years, and really, a lot has changed. We've switched we've switched Chychrun for Jensen, which I think is an upgrade for, the overall impact. But is it a good three-pairing defense? The jury's still out, I think.
Time will tell on that for sure.
Yeah.
All right, that's going to wrap everything up for today. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you on. Dayton, thanks for coming back as usual. You're not sick of me yet somehow. But yeah, so thanks everybody for tuning in. Come back next week and we'll be officially in the Ottawa Senators regular season. Check out all the content on thehockeywriters.com. We've been quite busy over the last few weeks with Senators content, and make sure to go check out all of Alex's stuff. So we'll see you next time. Take care.